Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. First, I'm just going to have to ask you to bear with me. I have a little bit of a cold this evening, so if you can't tell if I'm starting to have a little bit of difficulty speaking. As the mayor introduced the topic, the item before you are proposed amendments to the city's large retail establishment ordinance and design manual. Just to provide a little bit of background on the subject, prior to August of 2005, the Muscat City Code allowed for retail establishments, regardless of size, in several commercial zoning districts throughout the community. In August of 2005, the City Council passed, at that time, an emergency ordinance that required the issuance of a conditional use permit for any retail establishment that exceeded 40,000 square feet in size. That was followed in February of 2006 when the City Council passed Ordinance 2003. That was a permanent ordinance regarding large retail establishments that required a conditional use permit for retail developments over 40,000 square feet, that instituted a requirement for additional studies and design standards, that is the design manual, for large retail establishments over 65,000 square feet. In the spring of 2006, the City Council requested the Planning and Zoning Commission to review the recently adopted 2006-03 ordinance, and the Commission forwarded recommended amendments to the ordinance in 2007, which were not adopted by the Council at that point in time. In 2010, the City Council again requested the Commission to review the previously proposed 2007 amendments so the Council could reconsider them. There were some minor amendments that were made to those previously proposed amendments, and those were adopted by the City Council on June 7th of 2010. On April 27th of this year, the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission conducted their annual joint meeting session. At that point in time, the Council requested the Commission to review the conditional use permit and economic impact study requirements of the current large retail establishment ordinance. I thought I'd just give a little bit of summary of the requirements currently under the City Zoning Code for large retail establishments. Currently, there are both Category 1 and Category 2 large retail establishments require the issuance of a conditional use permit. The expansion of any existing Category 1 or Category 2 is allowed by right without a conditional use permit up to 30% of their existing size, but any expansions in excess of 30% of their existing size does require the issuance of a conditional use permit. Category 1 large retail establishments are those that are over 40,000 square feet, and Category 2 are those that are over 65,000 square feet. Under the design manual addresses both site development requirements as well as building architectural features, and addresses elements such as facade and roof appearance, architectural features, entryways and storefronts, pedestrian and bicycle access, public transportation opportunities, parking lot design, size, community spacing and features, and landscaping and parking lot landscaping. Currently, the design manual, both Category 1 and Category 2 large retail establishments are required to follow a design manual. The expansion of existing Category 1 and Category 2 large retail establishments are required to follow the design manual to the extent that is feasible in consideration of the existing site development as determined by the zoning administrator. For new large retail establishments, the design manual elements are requirements, and significant deviations would require a variance. As you reach to the Category 2, that is over 65,000 square feet in size, there are several additional studies that are currently required. The first is a site location and existing and future street and pathways assessment, where the applicant must show that the proposed development does not preclude the extension of existing or planned public streets and or pathways. There's a multimodal traffic study that is required that requires a traffic impact study and mitigation actions as approved by the city engineer. There is a noise analysis that is required, which requires an analysis by a certified sound engineer to ensure that the city's noise regulations will be met by the proposed development. There's a city services and city infrastructure impact assessment where the applicant must provide public utility service impact analysis and provide mitigation if needed as deemed by the city engineer. Under stormwater management, the city's base code currently requires stormwater detention for any development that creates more than 5,000 square feet of new impervious surface. Under the design manual, it also requires stormwater treatment in addition to detention. And this element is not unique to Category 2. It also applies to Category 1 large retail establishments. So biofiltration swales, other stormwater treatment devices that both improve the stormwater quality as well as require detention for the quantity. There is a section that requires hazardous materials to be protected from the weather to prevent contaminated runoff. There is a requirement of the applicant to obtain and provide proof to the city of a MPDS general construction permit that is a stormwater permit that is granted and administered by the Environmental Protection Agency. There is a requirement that the applicant provide an economic effects study that shall include assessment of impact upon wages, benefits, and community income levels, the projection of costs of social services resulting from the operation of the proposed development, an assessment of the effect that the construction operation will have upon the average total vehicle miles traveled by retail customers in the market area, analysis of the effect upon surrounding land values, an assessment of market and financial feasibility of the proposed development. There is also a requirement that the applicant for a new Category 2 large retail establishment provide notification to taxing entities within the primary market area. And there's a requirement that the applicant also conduct and provide a comprehensive plan assessment that assesses the impact the proposed development would have upon the city implementing its goals, objectives, and policies within the comprehensive plan. The proposed amendments this evening, the Commission reviewed the City Council's request to review the conditional use permit requirement and the economic impact study requirement. Over the course of several meetings through the months of May, June, and July of this year, and developed the following proposed amendments they are recommending to the City Council this evening. The first was really to simplify the large retail establishment process. We have our Category 1, Category 2, and the Commission recommended simplifying it by just defining large retail establishments as those retail establishments that are over 40,000 square feet in size. The next step would be to shift large retail establishments as permitted principal uses within the motor business and industrial zoning districts. They are currently conditionally permitted uses within those zoning districts. The third would then create a tiered system of requirements where large retail establishments that are over 40,000 square feet would be subject to the design manual, but would be permitted uses by right. Those that were over 65,000 square feet would also be subject to design manual and also would require 3 additional studies: the site location, existing and future streets and pathway review, the traffic impact study, and the city services and infrastructure impact assessment. But again, would be permitted uses by right within the motor business and the industrial zoning districts. And then the last requirement would be that large retail establishments that were over 90,000 square feet inside would be required to obtain a conditional use permit in addition to the design manual and the 3 additional studies required of those over 65,000 square feet. The proposed amendments also creates a new public input or public participation process in a community meeting that is very similar to our neighborhood meeting process, but has a broader notice, publication of paper, posting on site to advertise to a broader area. And any new large retail establishment or any expansion of existing large retail establishments of greater than 30% would be required to conduct one of these meetings. The ordinance also has some amendments to the design manual review process. All new large retail establishments and expansions of over 30% would be reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission as a non-public hearing regular agenda item. Expansions of less than 30% would be continued to be reviewed by staff as they are under the current code today. There's also a new section under the design manual review process entitled Alternate Compliance Methods, which provides the opportunity for the reviewing body to authorize alterations to some of the standards within the design manual where they would meet the intents and purposes of the design manual elements or maybe provide a superior mitigation. And an example I give of this is that the Walmart store in their expansion was required to provide these community meeting spaces, and the design manual would require one to be at the rear of the store. And there wasn't really much value of placing one at the rear of the store, given the site, the topography, and the slope to the rear of the store. So we moved that around to the front of the building so they could provide a greater benefit to the community and to the public. There are also a few amendments to the design manual. The first is to clean up some of the introductory language that made reference to the prior existing emergency ordinance. We replaced the word board references with the reviewing party because some of it may be administratively by the zoning administrator or some may be by the Planning and Zoning Commission. We did adjust some of the landscaping coverage requirements, which were that they be 50% at the time of planting and 90% at the time of maturity, to reduce those down so that rock mulch and bark and other materials could be used in landscaping practices. And there was a new component that was added entitled Site Adaptability and Conversion Planning that the Commission was recommending inserting into the design manual, which would require a new schematic site redevelopment plan for new large retail establishments that would illustrate how the site could be repurposed or redevelopment if the principal primary occupant were to relocate from the property at some point in the future. Some of the material outcomes in the changes: large retail establishments of 90,000 square feet or less would become permitted principal uses rather than conditionally permitted uses. Large retail establishments that were greater than 90,000 square feet would continue to be conditionally permitted uses. New large retail establishments and expansions of greater than 30% would be required to conduct a community meeting. And the following current required additional studies would no longer be required under the proposed amendments: the economic effects study, the noise assessment, the text notification of taxing entities, the comprehensive plan assessment, the hazardous materials component, which actually still remains, but which has been relocated within the stormwater provision section because it related to contaminated runoff. The provision of the construction general permit, this is administered by EPA, and that certainly would still apply. The other additional outcomes would be that the alternate compliance methods would allow the reviewing body to approve alternate methods to achieve the intents and purposes of the ordinance, where they would provide equivalent or superior mitigation of impacts of the proposed large retail establishment. And the design manual would require the site adaptability and conversion sketch, as I discussed here previously. The Planning and Zoning Commission conducted a public hearing upon the proposed amendments on August 24th and unanimously recommended approval of the proposed amendments to the City Council this evening. Staff's recommendation certainly is to conduct the public hearing upon consideration of the testimony received, approve the proposed ordinance and design manual amendment resolution, or take other action as deemed appropriate. So with that, I would try to answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you, Bill. Sue?
I have my standard question and one other. My standard question is always the square footage of Tri-State, Walmart, Moscow Building Supply, and Tidy Bins, which you knew I was going to ask you. And the second one is, if I were going to build Duckworth boats or jet boats in the industrial zone, and I was going to have my manufacturing section, and I was going to have a large retail section, like a trade show section, would I be considered an LRE, and would I need a CUP?
Let me try to tackle that second one first. If you were predominantly a manufacturing company and you happen to have a showroom there, we wouldn't consider you to be a large retail establishment unless your showroom was potentially over 40,000 square feet, and even then we would have to make an assessment of whether this is an accessory retail use to the principal manufacturing use in the property. So I would say most likely that is not going to fall within the definition of what would be considered a large retail establishment. The first question regarding square footage of example stores, the Tidyman's store is approximately at 40,000 square feet. The prior Tidyman's building is an approximately 40,000 square feet facility. I think you mentioned Tri-State, which is about 52,000 square feet in size.
Moscow Building Supply.
And these are just very round numbers, estimates.
But I gave you time to figure it out.
You did.
I warned
You
you.
did. East Side Marketplace is, I think, a little over 150,000 square feet in total size. And you mentioned Spence.
Moscow Building Supply.
Moscow Building Supply on the retail side, I think, is in the upper 20s, 26,000, just for the front retail store portion of the building. And did I miss any others you had asked?
The old Walmart was?
93,000 square feet.
Okay. Thank you.
Wayne, I saw your hand next.
A couple of questions, Bill. Back on number 5, design manual review. All new LREs and expansions over 30% would be reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission as a non-public hearing. Regular agenda item, expansions of less than 30% would be reviewed by staff. What would be the purpose of that? Why?
Why the review by the commission?
Why would Planning and Zoning be reviewing the design manual?
I think the commission felt that they would like to be part of the review process for new large retail establishments or substantial expansions of existing. It would not be, as drafted, it's not a public hearing process, so it would just be in a regular agenda item review for the commission to undertake.
This would be something that staff was quite capable of doing?
Staff certainly could do the review if that was something that the council wished to have completed.
The other
but
question I had, Bill, was number 6, on the alternate compliance methods, which I think that's a good idea. Who would be the reviewing body? That would be planning and zoning?
The alternate compliance section applies to both the Planning and Zoning Commission if they were conducting the review, or the zoning administrator if it was an administrative action.
Okay.
Tim?
Bill, I also kind of got caught by number 5, the same question that Wayne had previously asked you about. Since I don't have P&Z's set of directions in front of me, I'm just wondering if that would be a normal part of their function?
Doing the design review
the design manual and an expansion of 30% or of a new large retail establishment?
It would be a change. Currently, that would be a function for the board. Under the ordinance as it exists today, a new large retail establishment or an expansion of greater than 30% would be a conditionally permitted use and would be reviewed by the Board of Adjustment. This would be a shift to have them, to have the Planning and Zoning Commission conduct that review process. The staff review of something that's 30% or less is currently what's in the code today.
Thank you.
Walter?
Thank you, ma'am. Following on the previous 2 questions, Bill, does planning and zoning, with the exception of this ordinance, currently do any technical review of either public submitted documents or anything like that? I guess, does that make any sense? If we're not trying to choke you to death here.
No, I'm just trying to I'm just trying to work my throat a little bit.
I'd rather see you doing it this week than I was 2 weeks ago. So,
and thank you for that. No, the commission does review probably the closest example of a similar type of review that the commission completes are planned unit developments. And so they review subdivision plats, they review planned unit developments, and those include site plans, landscaping plans, architectural drawings oftentimes. So a planned unit development review would probably be the closest review that they currently complete that would be similar to this.
Other questions of Bill? Walter?
and one more, the references to the NPDES. Does this contain either currently or proposed any NPDES requirements greater than what federal law requires?
Not greater, well, currently the stormwater treatment component of the design or of the ordinance is currently in place, is not, I wouldn't say it's greater than federal law. We are currently in the process of obtaining our Phase 2 stormwater permit. That permit will have certain education, stormwater treatment management techniques. This certainly has requirements that are beyond what is required of other developments within the city of Moscow. As I mentioned before, we do require stormwater detention for new developments that create more than 5,000 square feet of impervious area, but we do not have any stormwater treatment standards that are required for any other user other than large retail establishments. Now, to ask whether that's anything in excess of what federal law would require, I think federal law is coming down with our Phase 2 NPDES permit, and so I think what is currently in the draft of the LRE will become a requirement probably for most all development down the road to have stormwater treatment devices as part of new projects. So I don't think it's in excess of federal, although our permit hasn't been approved and has not been issued yet, so maybe in advance of us receiving that permit from EPA.
Walter?
Follow up, please. So if we did not have the references to NPDES in our ordinances, would the developer be required by federal law to do the things that we have in our ordinances? I mean,
well,
that's where I'm headed.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at, the NPDES references to the general construction permit, and that is a stormwater practice. That is a permit that all construction projects of a certain scale have to obtain from EPA before they do large land disturbance, and that's where they have the stormwater pollution protection plan and all of those elements. They are required to do that regardless of what we have in our ordinance. What is different. I think we're talking about maybe two different things: post-construction stormwater management and treatment versus site disturbance management, revegetation, erosion control, sediment control. That is really what's in the MPDS general permit process, and that applies whether it's in our ordinance or not.
Okay.
The additional stormwater treatment, permanent installation of stormwater treatment devices, that is something that is not required of other uses, that is required of LREs because it is in our code right now. But I anticipate that's a requirement that's coming for all uses as our Phase 2 MPDS permit comes forward.
Thank you.
Other questions for Bill? Tim?
Thank you, Mayor Cheney. Bill, I have to admit that I was caught somewhat with a section in the design manual that appears to be new to me, the site adaptability and conversion planning.
Yes.
And since I attended the public hearing that P&Z conducted on the large retail establishment, there was some brief discussion of this, and then all of a sudden it popped up in the proposed design manual. And I'm just wondering if something from, since I didn't ask the question at the public hearing, something that in the Idaho building codes or the city proposed building codes is generating this requirement for a plan to develop or redevelop a site, an existing site, after it's no longer used for its original intended purpose?
There's nothing within the city's building code or anticipated updates to the building code or the zoning code that would compel somebody to redevelop their site or require them to do that. I think the intent that the commission had as they discussed this language, and it was Commission member Nils Peterson that really brought the language forward to the commission for their consideration. And the example that he gave during that meeting was the concept of some of these larger scale developments, and the East Side Marketplace was really the example that he provided, and whether it would be helpful for developers to think about potential future redevelopment and reuse of their sites if a big box principal occupant were to relocate at some point in the future, and whether some thought given to the site layout, the building placements, would allow the site to be more easily redeveloped or repurposed at some point in the future. And so I think the concept was a little bit of thought given to it now might change how they were to lay out the project today that might help facilitate its redevelopment or repurposing at some point in the future. So I think that was really the thought process behind it. It probably is related to larger scale developments, more so than a single 40,000 square foot store. I think it was more of the Palouse Mall and East Side Marketplace scale of developments that were really the ones that were of some concern.
Okay. It's kind of hard to look at that far out into the future, at least from my perspective, and say, well, the physical plant is this today, and in 5 years, given the economics of the nation, the state, and the city, is it going to be better, easier to redevelop, worse? So that's kind of crystal ball looking, it seems to me, but thank you for your explanation.
Okay, Walter?
Following on Tim's question, it strikes me as asking a developer to tell us your plan for when you fail, or tell you what our plan can be when you fail. As written, however, Bill, it does apply to 40,000 square feet and up.
It does
retail.
Currently.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate your report. I did ask the Planning and Zoning Commission Chair Art Betke to come and speak as to the recommendations of P&Z and to respond to questions that the council may have pursuant to those recommendations. Randy?
I'd recommend, based upon the way your code reads, that if Mr. Betke is going to address the council, he does so within the public testimony portion of the hearing, because this says that the Planning and and Zoning Commission forwards the recommendation at the close of the public hearing, and if there are, and the recommend should be in writing, if they're dissenting members, then they can submit written comments. But it doesn't call for an explanation of those other than what's in your record. It is legislative, so he could testify. But because it's outside of what your due process may be requiring, I'd suggest that if he's required to speak or invited to speak, he does so within the public hearing portion. And then you also may ask him whether or not he's speaking for the commission, because the commission is given the council their recommendation in writing with the opportunity for dissenting members who have also done it in writing. And any characterization that Mr. Betke might make that was not in accordance with somebody else's opinion might also skew what that written recommendation was as your code requires.
Yes, all of those things occurred to me, and I did address it to staff. I had asked Mr. Betke to come and speak as to the recommendations of the Planning and Zoning Commission as a body, not to weigh in with his personal opinions or anything like that, but simply to be here to represent that commission. I'd be very happy to open the public hearing in advance of his remarks, however. Would you pause just a moment, Art, while I do that?